This message is proudly sponsored by CO2 Meter.
Hello and welcome to the 1895 podcast with me, Thomas D.
And me, Rob Cockerell.
Rob, how are you? We're back at base now, as you said last episode, back at the ranch.
We are. I'm a lot colder than I was.
It's much warmer out.
We enjoyed some lovely balmy temperatures in Denver, didn't we?
Certainly did, yeah. Much colder back here. Typical British weather in October, I think.
Yeah, but more to come in the next couple of weeks when we're off to Austin, Texas as well.
Yes, in just a few days' time we'll be back on the plane, back in the US, so looking forward to that.
This UK leg feels a bit like a stopover in that
just
respect.
A bit of a stopover, yeah, here momentarily until we head back to the US. But we're here on the podcast today, as we've been promising in the last couple of episodes. We're going to have our usual event debrief and review the North American CO2 Summit 2025.
We are, and that stopover here in the UK has been just enough time for the actual physical file, Tom, to turn up with all the audio from the event.
Yes, listeners may notice a bit of a delay in this episode going out. Normally, we're pretty good at getting these out quite quickly, reviewing the footage.
While it's hot, yeah.
While it's hot and going back over it, but we've been back, 2 or 3 weeks now?
Yep.
And thankfully, a parcel arrived just the other day with the audio files, which I can't believe we're in 2025 and we're having to post things such as that.
An actual hard drive with audio files. I kind of like it. I think I like it.
Old school.
Yeah. Let's keep it that way, yeah.
But we have now had a chance to retrieve those files and go through some of our favourite points, some of the important points of the event, and it'll be great to listen back and relive some of that event. Maybe nicer now that it's a bit longer ago.
Yeah, maybe reliving it. And yeah, as you said, we're fusing it with some of our own notes and memories in terms of the pertinent talking points on the day or on the 2 days.
Before we get into some of these presentations, thoughts on Denver? Do you like Colorado?
Yeah, loved it. Yeah, I thought it was great. Do you know what? I caught an incredible sunset over the Rocky Mountains when I was flying out, and it seemed to go on forever. The plane was just cruising. It was incredible. That alone made Denver, Colorado for me. But yeah, loved it. Loved the place. Loved flying in. Loved flying out. The whole experience while we were there, and the event, of course. I know we're bound to say that, but widespread praise for the best CO2 summit yet. So yeah, what's not to like?
I really liked it. I liked getting out into the country a bit. Went to the Red Rocks amphitheatre the day that we flew back, so got to see a bit of that. Had a bit of a walk around there. Really nice place. Loved it.
And you overcame the altitude to have a bit of a run out there as well,
just
which was great.
Overcame the altitude. Didn't expect it to be quite that
I didn't
different.
think you'd struggle with that, no.
But yeah, it was more difficult than I expected, but powered through it and lived to tell the tale.
I'd expect nothing less.
But anyway, let's get into the North American CO2 Summit 2025, and the best place to start always from the beginning, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So we began session 1. That's where we like to set the scene, isn't it? We looked at the market dynamics and demand, and we began actually slightly oddly, some might say, we began by looking at global CO2 markets and trends. And as the kind of curator and originator of these agendas, I can tell you that was so we can provide the global context, courtesy of gasworld intelligence, and then from there on we can proceed to drill down into the kind of the North American market and the outlook and where we go from there. So that's how we began, and we began with our colleague Aidan Sparrowhawk.
So I mentioned it's a large, complex market. We believe that it was about a $10 billion market globally in 2024. We project that'll grow by about $3 billion to $13 billion by 2030. And of course, as I said, it's not one uniform market. That won't be one uniform growth story. Actually, each region and each sub-region, in fact, has their own nuances. Like I said, I'll try and do the whole thing justice, but I'll stay relatively high level. We also have a report available that my intelligence team has published that goes into a lot more detail. So I'm also happy to answer questions on it. So if you have any questions, please do come to me or speak to a member of the the GasWorld team. And if you do think that you would like to dive into the data a little bit more, then the report might be the one for you. Looking at those regions then, I'll start with North America, obviously our home for the day. As you can see there, it's about 4.5 billion, about half the market. And what it offers is being the largest market, really kind of sets the pace for growth, offers somewhat average growth across all the regions. Despite all those shortages, and Rob, you rightly say that this feels a little bit of a quiet time in that regard, but actually we will continue to see those shortages and peaks, but we project that it'll offer somewhat steady growth up until 2030. Behind that, in terms of size, but certainly very different in terms of growth trajectory, we have Europe and we have Asia Pacific. So Europe is actually our slowest growing region as we project by 2030. There's a lot of opportunity there in terms of carbon capture and biogenic sources. But the question, I guess, is will the regulatory alignment, will the collaboration, will the investment follow to enable it to sort of capitalize on that opportunity? Asia Pac next is similar size, but actually a lot faster growth, kind of tracking similar to the USA, or North America, I should say, sorry. But we've got some growth engines there, particularly in South and Southeast Asia. One of the challenges in the region is the long shipping lines. So the question that we have, and what we'll be looking out for, is can they grow their infrastructure to I guess, meet that growing demand?
And I guess that's those growth engines, that's the advancing economies becoming more established, industrial markets growing, food and beverages, and that's the tailwind for industrial gas. Exactly.
Yeah, growing consumer demand in emerging markets is a really big thing that we've seen. And the same goes on for our smaller markets, Middle East and Africa and South America, both the fastest. In fact, EMEA is the fastest of the lot. There's a lot of government backing, growth in new fuels, and of course they've got a lot of existing natural resources. So they're really driving ahead, really showing the way. But potential challenges there would be scaling infrastructure, regulatory alignment again. And then South America, similar, quite high growth, but the smallest base of the lot. Same story in terms of growing consumer demand, also a growing industrial capacity. If I then move on to industries, and again, sort of talking about the industries that are shaping the demand, you've got this similar story really, and you've got one large category there in food and bev, and as we've seen, that's kind of driving a lot of the growth, albeit again that's from this chart and looking from this slice, it's setting the average pace. You've got your heavy industry and then your energy processes. The former is our slowest growing category, as you'll see on the next slide. And then you've got the two, again, the smallest categories, but where the real growth is. You've got a load of categories there in the green, kind of small but growing. And then you've got health and technology and pharma in the yellow slice there. And if I just cut to the graph of compound annual growth rate, you can see that the blue, the food and bev, that is the average line, but that it says that the innovation catalyst of health and tech really showing the way, albeit currently stands at about 1/10 the size of the food and bev market. So finally, my final slice, then my final view. We've got the sourcing outlook. So these are the sources of CO2, how they've grown. The first chart, in case that's not super clear from the back, the first chart is 2020, and the second bit is 2024. So really interesting story here, I think, in that big red chunk. That's the what we call the core. So that's the combustion, the refineries, the natural wells, the ammonia production. Very stable. We've seen a little bit of growth since 2020. That we project that stability to continue, if not maybe tip into slight decline. Where we're seeing the growth is the biogenic stuff. So that's the yellow slice in the middle. That's got a 1.3% compound annual growth rate since 2020. And actually, we think that there's a huge amount of potential there. Rob mentioned Rotterdam, and we heard there that from the European Biogas Association that biogas in Europe production was due to they project to grow by 50% by 2030. So there's a lot of potential there, providing obviously that gas isn't being vented, it's being captured and fed into the market, then it would appear in our numbers. And then finally, you've got that top green slice, the highest growth again, but as the story goes, from the lowest base, you've got direct air capture there, you've got chemical production of CO2. So actually, again, large potential there, providing investment follows.
Thanks to Aidan there. First time on stage at a GasWorld event and plenty more to come. I know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Aidan's our data intelligence director. Debut, it's his second GasWorld event, and both of them were CO2 summits. Did the European version in Rotterdam, yes, and then, of course, the North American event in Denver. Second event, first stage appearance. We chose a more relaxed, casual fireside chat style, but yeah, some great headlines coming out of that, I think. I mean, he talked about a $10 billion CO2 market in 2024-25, approaching around $13 billion by 2030, I believe, more than half of which is driven by the still large food and beverages business.
Yeah, some great facts and figures there from Aidan. And then moving into the session, it's great to build on that scene setter from yourself and Aidan. And firstly, we did that with Maura Garvey of Intelligas Consulting, who really focused in on the North American market. We heard a little from her in the last episode where I caught her after her session. But her presentation got real into the nitty gritty of the market and the way that's going, didn't it?
It did. And this is, we know, we also heard from Morgan in the last episode, and we hear from so many people, Maura's talk is one of the ones that everybody looks for. So why don't we dive into it?
Let's do it.
To start off, this is just to sort of put CO2 in the U.S. market. Where is it? And I have it at $3.6 billion, or 12% of the $30 billion U.S. industrial gas business. Okay. Now, the merchant demand by application. I keep working on this all the time. And one of the things that we've been finding over the last 10 years is a lot of the food companies, which is a major part of this, they've been able to actually reduce their consumption of CO2 by anywhere from 15 to 20% over that time. And the whole reason is that we've had so many shortages come up, and they've got tired of all that happening. So they've done a lot of substitution where they can. So they've been able to drive down the amount of actual CO2 that they're using. So these numbers are, reflect my latest analysis. The next piece that is important to talk about, beverage is stable, I should say that. The next piece to talk about is dry ice. Dry ice is really the fastest growing part of our whole CO2 business here in the US. And I have it now at about 20% of the liquid CO2 consumption. We actually produce about 4,600 tons a day of ice, of dry ice. And actually tomorrow I'll be talking a little bit more on dry ice and go into a deeper dive then. Demand flat over last year because we just have not been able to grow. We've actually lost sources. I'll get into that. So we are basically at about 10.4 million tons per year. If we had sufficient supply, I think we'd grow closer to 2% per year. Basically food, we all know that's just really more, it's population and geography driven. And then you get into beverage, and it's interesting, beverage is kind of interesting because you get all these new seltzers and all of that, and hard seltzers. And then there's a whole craft brewery industry out there too that's using CO2. And I've actually done a deep dive into the craft brewers business for the Craft Brewers Association. So it's very interesting, but it's one of those industries that goes up and down. It's cyclical. You add suppliers and then they go, and the beer makers, and then they go away. For the industrial side, metalworking just really follows the fabrication market. So however that's going in the U.S. with the economy, that's how that market goes. Wastewater treatment, much more environmentally friendly to use CO2, so that's a good business. These are all sort of just, they're slower growing though. But the biggest is in the other category, which is the cold pellet blast cleaning. And that's what I have noticed has really grown probably about 10% over the last 5 to 6 years. We have so much more dry ice being produced, and it's because of the blast cleaning. It's so much more environmentally friendly and efficient, and we'll get into that again tomorrow on dry ice. And then under other, that's such a small segment. It's like, cannabis, everyone thinks it's growing really fast, but it's really only growing as fast as the legalization is happening. And it's also still small quantities, so it just isn't a lot. And the same thing with medical CO2. For new applications, the sustainable aviation fuels and e-fuels, that's going to take a lot of CO2, and we don't have it. But with the new, with carbon capture utilization now, the parity with the carbon capture, the $85 credit, I think that may help that come along. And so that might be a more viable use in the future. Now, I'm going to get into the supply chain, and the reason I want to talk about that is those other biogenic sources, the new sustainable sources. First, though, we start with the crude sourcing, and I've listed out all the different types, and then you get into the liquid production, primary distribution, and then the primary distribution is usually by its larger volumes by the majors, and you get into secondary distribution, and that's usually by those independent distributors, and then, of course, we have the dry ice category. But what I want to focus on is the other category. That's where those sources are gaining traction. I've talked about this for a couple of years here, and now we've got a second plant. And there are others out there that are just not announced. There's a lot more activity going on in trying to bring along some of these other sources. They're biogenic, typically from waste, food, dairy. There's also landfill. They're a little bit slower going on the landfill side. But the big concerns about some of these sources that people voice are that can they meet the ISBT grade spec? And the reason for that is, you've got the brands are concerned about the quality, and also our distribution infrastructure is all based on moving, that higher purity CO2, and you can't cross-contaminate containers. And so it's important that it's a higher purity, unless you can do a secondary supply chain, because there's a lot of dry ice applications, like in the blasting, where you don't need that higher purity. You can just use the lower purity. The other thing is that these sources tend to be smaller in volume and higher in cost. But given what's been happening over the last few years, we have had pricing increase enough, and especially looking into next year, where we are losing more sources again. I think with pricing increasing, it actually justifies the economics of bringing some of these sources on. And then my supply-demand balance. In 5 years, I basically say, CO2 demand should be growing at 2% per year. I don't see how that's going to happen given not hearing enough new sources coming on, because it basically, to do that, to grow just 2% per year, we need a minimum of 300-ton-a-day plants added by 2030.
And that was Maura Garvey of Intelligas Consulting there. Some great headline facts, figures there, wasn't it? And I think you really had to be in the room to get the most of all of those. We can only play a section of it there. Yeah, and I think that's what's important. So we provided that global context, but then you need to drill down, don't you, into the US or North American view and what's happening. And you might argue no one knows that better than Maura. And rounding off session one, we heard from Bruce Woerner, of course, of Woerner CO2 Consulting. Again, we heard from him last episode with a bit of an overview of his presentation, but in his talk, he got into the policies and the reality of those policies, gave us a few updates on what's happened with policy in the last 12 months and a few surprises along the way too. Yeah, definitely. And I think as we explored in the last episode, we love Bruce. He's great value, great personality, very calm and laid back about it as well. And I think oozes a kind of confidence from that. But as we said, it's always a good double act between him and Maura. And he's got this kind of aura, I guess, that he knows the existing and the traditionals, very much the same as Maura, but he's also so excited and knowledgeable about the future and what's coming, and not in any kind of overblown manner, but
he can tell you, look, this is where your CO2 is going to come from tomorrow in all likelihood, and this is why and how. And that's, as we heard, that's fantastic.
Yeah, great to have that energy and great to have that authority on our stage.
Why should you care about Z? Well, the ethanol industry, roughly 40% of the supply in this industry, and Z is going to be huge for them. Z, the value of Z can be at least 4 times more than Q. So there was an opportunity with Q to expand your existing plant and garner that $85 a ton credit, through a life cycle analysis. Well, with Z out there, you can't do both. You've got to choose one or the other. And if you choose Z, obviously that's the one to go with because it is so much more valuable. So all these CO2 plants that would have wanted to expand existing facilities at ethanol plants like Airgas is doing at Hopkinsville, if someone wants to go for the Z credit, that means you cannot qualify both. Okay, let's talk about policy and a little bit of my predictions of what I think may be happening for us. As we've all said, very, very stable year. Fortunately, it's good for everyone, right? Customers don't like it. Suppliers don't want to have the hassle. Those of you who have to keep your customers supplied, you're not looking forward to disruption. So very good for the industry that it was good, but don't get too complacent. We all know there's a business cycle and there will be a recession. We all know CO2 sources are going to get scarce. There will be issues again. We just don't know when, but we know it's coming, and I submit it might be a little bit faster than you might think. For those of you who were here last year, Scott Vanderberg, he predicted perhaps a 1/3 decrease in the supply of capacity across the country, which is 10,000 plus tons a day. It's huge, and within 10 years. And he may still be right, but I certainly agree with him that we're not out of the woods. Don't be fooled by this complacency. Don't get too used to it. Many sources closed. I won't go into the details. And as Maura said, I don't profess to have perfect knowledge. If I'm wrong, please correct me. Maybe not in this panel session, but outside later. But please let me know if I'm wrong. But best I know, there were 4 ethanol plants that closed last year. So even without pipelines being in place and with very little CCUS and Class 6 wells of people putting it down whole to get the extra benefits of Z and what have you, we still had a contraction of sources. So it's happening, and the next thing on the horizon, as we've said, people are generally aware that California is now ground zero, that in addition to the 3 sources we're looking at, 1 refinery source with 2 off-takers on it is about to close imminently. But in addition to that, Valero up in Benicia, which is a source for Linde, they may be saved. That I think they were fined almost $100 million by the state of California for pollution violations, which were probably not that egregious, but I think the refiners know how difficult it is to do business in California, and that has informed their decision of wanting to exit the state. So maybe the Governor Newsom is now saying he might offer some incentives, a lot of money to offset these problems so that they can continue to operate, because these refineries, if they both close, it's 20% of the refinery capacity and it's 20% of the CO2 capacity in the state. But it's even scarier than that. There's 2 ethanol sources that supply California. Well, guess what? They've been losing money, significant money every gallon, up to 20, 25 cents per gallon for years and years, and it's gone on. And you ask yourself, why are they doing this? How much longer are they going to persist? And are they going to hit the point where they pull the plug? It also impacts the source up in Oregon. We've got a representative from that company, Alto Ingredients, here. So they think they've found some solutions to right their ship and keep that plant afloat. But just points to the difficulties of this industry and how many things can impact you. And we all know destination plants for ethanol are the most disadvantaged and have the most difficult time surviving. But there are some very positive things on the horizon. So if E15 is adopted even in the state of California, that's a 5% increase in the ethanol demand, which would be huge. If that happens, it will lift margins for all ships, at least for a year or two, until the industry decides to give back most of those benefits gained through the pricing and lowering the margins. So let's hope that doesn't happen.
And that wrapped up session 1, but we very swiftly moved into session 2, didn't we? Focusing on CO2 utilisation with Jeff Holyoak, Erica Chase, and Brendan Weibel. A great lineup there.
It was, and it was good to pick up the baton from Bruce. So he's kind of told us about where you're going to get it from tomorrow, your CO2, and then we actually heard some of those case studies and calls to action about actually the detail behind that.
And this first clip I want to play is from Jeff Holyoak of TOMCO Systems presentation, and some great sound bites in there, so I won't spoil too much of that.
So I like to classify everything you all heard outside of our general historic ethanol and geological and ammonia production. I classify everything else as alt CO2, alternative CO2. The CO2 is still CO2. It's just coming from alternative sources than we're traditionally used to using in our commercial application. So I kind of classify everything in that group. So what does that mean today? And we already heard about multiple of these and even more coming. But we've got direct air capture, source gas capture, which is flue gas, or off of generators, or natural gas boilers, things of that nature. Biogas, landfills, farm waste, things like that. All these things that we already all know about. Direct air capture, really interesting one. And we can take the CO2 back out of the ocean, clean it up, and resequester it. Geologic CO2, not something we all talk about, but there's CO2 coming out of the ground and out of the earth. We know some of that as the Jackson Dome, but there's other sources of that occurred naturally. But there's others. We heard about glass, and we heard about some of these other sources coming online. That's the group. That's what we're talking about. And we've been talking about some of these for years. And we're still going to hear about a lot of pilot programs and beta sites, some coming into the market. Bruce just noted, there's potentially 30 biogas facilities coming online in the next couple of years. That would be amazing. But we're still talking about some of these. I want to push this farther and get us away from stop talking about them and dipping our toe in them and actually getting them to do it. But the question then becomes, why? Why have these not materialized like we all thought they were going to back in 2022? Why are they more materially and fundamentally a part of the infrastructure in Europe and not here in the US? So the question then is, what is it going to take? What will it take for the alt CO2 sources to become normal, to make a dent in all of these graphs, to start to replace some of these other alternatives where it makes sense, or, as we're seeing, where they go offline, or where they're going to be put to other uses, or we're going to be storing in the ground through pipelines, or Class 6 wells. So what's it going to take? When I made that was red, and it stood out much better than a yellow. But anyway, pain. So that's where I'm going to go back to that quote. I think of pain as in the market. Market disruption doesn't happen. I don't care how great your technology is. We don't change easily, just as humans. So without pain, market disruption is very difficult. It's very slow. So there is today not much reason to adopt a lot of these new technologies. We have our ethanol sources, we have our ammonia sources, we have our geological domes. That makes up over 75% of our supply in the US. Europe didn't have all of those, and they experienced pain decades ago and adapted, and they have more biogas and things like that now. We don't have pain. So the ultimate question everybody's asking in here is, when's that pain coming? Will it come? In 2022, we thought it was imminent. 2023, we all forgot about it. 2024, we thought it was going to be, and it wasn't. 2025, as you just heard both Bruce and Maura say, not much pain, unless you live in California and not experience pain. A little bit here, a little bit there, but really, it's been very, very stable market. So that's why we're going to hear about a lot of pilot programs and one-offs and first-of-a-kinds, and hopefully some investment in some of these other things. But we don't have pain yet. So the question then becomes, is the pain coming? So the question is, the creative destruction. I believe it's already begun. You just heard it, and it's coming. The balance of supply and demand, it is getting disrupted. There's a lot of what ifs. And if you follow our politics in this country, we have a lot of what ifs, right? What if this happens? What if this changes? What if everything we do for the next 3 years, we have a whole new administration comes in 3 years from now, 2.5 years from now, and we start all over? And somebody says, let's swing the pendulum back the other way. 45Q, triple it. What ifs, right? So what are some of these what ifs? Because not all of these are going to happen, and some of these are extremely pie in the sky, very unlikely to happen. But some of them could happen, maybe happen. And the question then becomes, what if? What if they do happen? Are we ready? One of the last statements you just heard Maura say is, these plants take a long time. New technologies, new developments, new proof of concepts take a long time. So we were talking about a new plant coming online in 2027, and we all know that means 2028 probably. And nothing against the guys doing that particular plant. That's just reality of construction these days. That always takes longer. We're always over budget, and it takes longer than we wanted. So, what if? Are we ready? Last statement. What if the what if is the what is? What if this really is our reality? And it is 2025, late fourth quarter, or it's 2026. What if some of those things on that list, one of those things on that list, two of those things on that list come to fruition? Are we ready? Do we have the technology, and have we adopted it and prepared the markets to catch it and meet up with it and hit the needs? And you're going to hear two presentations here and 10 more tomorrow and then this afternoon of people that are doing it. I highly recommend we all listen.
And as I said before, Tom, Jeff's always good for the energy and the enthusiasm, and he's not afraid to mince his words and get those calls to action out there.
Yeah, great value there. And I love the line of what if the what ifs become the what is. I think that's one of my quotes of the event.
Yeah, same. And I reflected on that on the day two, the recap from the first day. I felt that was quite poignant.
Yeah, so thanks to Jeff for that. We then moved into talking about biogas RNG with Erica Chase of CleanCycle Carbon.
One of my favourite talks.
Yes, a fantastic talk, and great to get some of that boots on the ground insight from a company who is doing it.
Yeah, I think that was the key bit, Tom. They are doing it, and they showed us how they're doing it, and it's got the product and it's certified. And Erica also showed us all of the future examples of them doing it, which should be coming on stream very quickly, actually. So boots on the ground, but tangible case studies for us to get behind.
Yeah, some great plans going forward. So let's listen to a bit of that.
Meet our Lewiston, North Carolina operating plant. It sits at a co-located Purdue Farms poultry processing and Darling ingredients rendering facility. They say it was easy, everyone would be doing it, and it was far from easy. We took on this project in Q4 of 2022, and there were so many failures and challenges along the way. Learning the intricacies of that tail gas, learning the seasonal variability of constituents in the biogas, excess moisture, methane carryover, all of those challenges I just mentioned. And the methane carryover is actually a really interesting point. There was significantly more methane in the tail gas than anyone anticipated. And while what was initially a big challenge to overcome, we now know with certain design adjustments, this problem now just becomes an additional revenue stream to these projects. As part of our process, we return that fugitive methane back to the RNG developer. So with all of that said, what we have now is the first of its kind small-scale CO2 purification and liquefaction system behind RNG in the country. It produces only 6 to 10 tons per day of beverage-grade liquid CO2, and we have system patents filed on both domestically and internationally. It originated during COVID, back when CO2 supply was a big challenge, and our team was asked to provide a guaranteed supply of CO2 back to the protein plant. At that time, there was no other CO2 behind RNG projects in the country. There's now one other site in the Midwest that's about 4 times the size of ours. And what's really incredible about this collective project, the wastewater treatment system, the RNG system, and the CO2 system actually won an award last week at the U.S. Poultry Environmental Conference for the groundbreaking sustainability initiatives that have set a new standard for environmental innovation. By installing this RNG and CO2 capture infrastructure, this project mitigated 17% of Purdue's corporate-wide emissions. That's 17% of their corporate-wide emissions, not just the sites, but corporately. It's become a showcase for sustainability and innovation in the protein industry. It was an incredible team effort between Purdue, Green Gas, the RNG developer, EFI, and CleanCycle Carbon. What can we in this room do with biogas CO2? What does this opportunity really look like? Thanks to our friends at the RNG Coalition, we have this map of the US illustrating all of the RNG projects operational, under construction, and planned as of this year. With almost 500 operational sites and over 400 more in development, the demand for CO2 capture is growing rapidly. RNG developers are eager for another revenue stream. With some assumptions, current operating biogas facilities, and again, these are the sites ready for this bolt-on technology, represent approximately 6,200 tons per day of CO2. With facilities in development, that adds another 5,700 tons per day, bringing the total potential to just under 12,000 tons per day. And very important to this room, the scenario I reviewed at our North Carolina facility, where we're delivering the CO2 back to an on-site co-located customer. This type of scenario with on-site captive customer represents less than 5% of the market opportunity. All other sites, dairy farms, landfill, food waste facilities, they do not have an obvious site use for CO2. This is where this room comes in. So biogas CO2 can be just another source. With taking a conservative approach and factoring in only 50% of these projects, the biogas market share is estimated to be 13% or 5,900 tons per day. So where does CleanCycle carbon fit into all of this? We have our one operating plant in North Carolina, and while it's small, it's our proof of concept. We now know how to make these projects work technically and financially. We have legal agreements on 10 additional sites that are in varying stages of development in North America. These are all existing and operating RNG sites that we can quickly bring to market. And when I say quickly, we can be operational and producing beverage-grade liquid CO2 within 15 to 18 months of definitive agreements in place. And we have another 40 sites or 1,600 tons per day of prospects we're currently evaluating in our third tier of projects. While these projects are smaller and the margins are tight, we've developed a business model where we own our technology, we fund the capital, we design, we construct, and we commission the sites. Ongoing, we operate the sites with both field and office staff, and we manage the quality of the product.
Thank you to Erica Chase there. That rounded off session 2, and then we had one final session of the day, and this was picking up one of the huge talking points, of course, in the CO2 business, and that's the food and beverage market. Yes, and as I said earlier when I discussed the talk from session 1 with Aidan, food and beverages, it still dominates. It's still the biggest end user demand driver for CO2. It will be for some time, despite that applications portfolio kind of diversifying and evolving. It's still food and bev. So in this session, we wanted to get behind the veil of that and uncover some of the threats and the opportunities. And some of those threats are essentially, they could be made ourselves, by not being careful, by substitution and that hidden displacement risk. And that's why we got into this session. And kicking off that session was Josh Pringle of CO2 Meter, of course, our sponsors for this episode of the 1895 podcast too. With that big announcement as well? With that big announcement, which we brought listeners in the previous episode. I think we'll listen back to that again in a moment, because it was nice to get that exclusive on stage, wasn't it? And also got into the detection side of the food and beverages business as well. Such an important topic for this industry, and safety is something that we just can't overlook. No, we can't. And for all of the talk of new sources, new pathways and everything else, and I think even in the last episode, Maura said, look, these guys, don't worry about the standards and the ISBT, they are doing it. Well, actually, not to contradict Maura, but that is paramount, and that's why we need these key companies and stakeholders and people like Josh that know it inside out and know how important detection and purity and safety is.
So now let's talk about food. I'm going to start this because you see here that I'm going to talk about nitrogen at a CO2 conference. I'm talking about nitrogen at a CO2 conference because most of the people that we deal with are moving in a direction that cuts out the CO2 supply that they need. They are tired of dealing with cost increases and changes and long-term contracts for gas that they can't get. So a significant number of the national breweries that we work with are moving in a direction where they are going to eliminate CO2 from their packaging line. They're doing it because they don't want to deal with all the issues we're talking about in the room today. So whether it's nitrogen for food packaging, whether it's in the beverage industry where they are combining CO2 and nitrogen to make a really great beer, in the beverage dispensing applications, unique use of gases, nitrogen or argon, say in craft cocktails. There's a huge movement in the craft, in the restaurant space to move to pre-packaged cocktails in a keg, think of it that way, because they don't want to have to deal with CO2. Obviously, laboratory and research, those folks are using it every day. And in industrial packaging, whether they're milling something, we heard about CO2 lasers, there's a big movement to try and find a replacement for CO2 with lasers and laser cutting. They've been very successful doing it in the refrigeration industry as well. But why does it matter? So if you don't know, nitrogen expands to 900 times its size when it goes from liquid to a gas. So cubic footage is important. Small rooms with dewars in them are deadly. There was an incident earlier this week where a driver was delivering liquid nitrogen in a dewar in an elevator. The freight elevator wasn't available. They put it on a regular elevator. What happens? Elevator breaks between mid-floors and that tank starts venting. The fire department was a little confused as to why they were there, but they figured it out pretty quickly. There's a obviously huge risk for health, whether it's actual freezing exposure or asphyxiation. And then I talked about the expansion rate. So it's difficult for the end user in a laboratory or a brewery to understand why a fire inspector is saying, you have 1,000 pounds of liquid nitrogen on hand, why don't you have an oxygen deficiency monitor? We've got to do a better job in the industries to explain that to customers. So how are folks staying ahead of this curve when it comes to things like nitrogen, argon, helium? The first is we're going to rely on OSHA's 29 CFR. They have created some federal standards around this. The second is NIOSH. If you're not familiar, NIOSH essentially does the research for OSHA, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. NFPA 55, important. I said there's an update coming for 2026. They are starting to include some regulations around compressed gases for things like nitrogen, argon, and helium. It will expand. They think NFPA 55 is maybe a half an inch thick right now. By the time we get to the two updates down the road, it's going to double in size because of these restrictions. CGA, anybody familiar with the Compressed Gas Association? Yeah, we're okay. The folks at CGA, and they're not here, so I'll throw them under the bus too. As an organization, CGA admits that we were a little behind with the requirements for CO2 gas detection and monitoring. We allowed the fire codes and the fire code officials to get out in front of it and essentially create standards that were a little bit out of bounds from an industry's perspective. That changed with nitrogen in food packaging. CGA's already created some standards that have been published. They're available, and you'll see some more coming. Last, I'm going to wrap up here. Rob and team always ask me, what's the latest and greatest, what's new? Here's something that's latest and greatest for us. We have partnered with the folks at BevCheck. You can now see the CO2 monitor or O2 monitors data in real time on your phone. Some people love this, some people don't love this. This is probably the #1 request we've gotten over the last 3 to 5 years is, can I see it on my phone? Can my manager see it at home on Friday night when we have an incident? And the folks at BevCheck have a technology platform that we were very able and easily to integrate with. We are excited about this. You guys are the first people hearing that we can do this. And they've got a couple hundred sites already up and running. They were quick to do it. We were really impressed. So yeah, now anybody wants to see the data real time, you can see the data real time. Tablet, phone, desktop, multiple folks across a platform or organization. And then I'm going to specifically mention these folks. So over the last couple of years, we've been proud to partner. The folks at Autodata are here, the folks at Pulse are here, the folks at Anova are here. We're very proud to partner with the telemetry providers. If someone wants to see their monitoring data in their telemetry platform, it's available and built in, ready to do it. Talked about BevCheck. I know David is here from TIMS. If you haven't had a chance to talk to him out in the lobby, please do so. The TIMS platform is a software platform that is ubiquitous across the independent gas distributor world here in the US. We have worked with David and team over the last few months to build very easily build in the CO2 monitoring data from an asset tracking perspective, as well as certification and annual inspection perspective as well. That means that when a tech goes in the field and installs a device, they put the serial number in, they instantly can help you track that data as an asset management tool. And then in the background, when the tech goes to do that annual certification, they hit submit, the customer automatically gets that information and bill. So huge opportunities for us with some of our technology partners. It's tough to be innovative when you're a device manufacturer, but we think we found some ways with these partners to be able to do it.
So as we look at this as our transition and our new sources for the CO2 supply, one thing that is critically important to understand, like we are doing the natural processes, right? Highly variable. Everything is changing from a variety of external factors as well as the natural process. We don't have the same ability to control the process because of the inputs and understanding that it's natural, right? We're there. We're seeing the ingredients get put together and go that way. Much broader impurity profile. We used to be able to define if it was source number one, it would have this range of impurities and we would expect to see this. And if you had something outside of that impurity profile, you had a process issue, right? So you had something else that was flagging that it's a problem. And now if you take an RNG type operation or a digester, you're still going to make methane. Is it a couple percentage points higher or lower? Is that related to the weather? Is that related to the feedstock? A lot of variables go into that. So in understanding that. The other thing that has happened is our detection capabilities have gotten much better, especially in the 2000s through the development of different analytical packages, FTIR, et cetera. And it has given us a better field response and a faster feedback to get that information. So we can use it to our benefit. Customers are being more aware as well. Now everyone can have an analytical package at their site. They can test upon receipt, and it creates a much more aware and capable loop. And it creates a challenge to suppliers, right? Because you have that immediate feedback and we make sure that we're not missing out on something. I have in here perception versus science, right? We touched base on this earlier this morning as well, right? What's the yuck factor? What's this? Why am I concerned about that source? Do I really want to touch that kind of thing? Versus what does the data say? Do we have enough information? Have we done the right analysis and testing to get us to that confidence level that we can manage from there? And what's the next hot button? What's the next impurity or other item that will be a factor to us that somebody's going to come up? Like right now it's the PFAS in another example, right? Everything is focusing around that. But as we develop into these new areas where we could concentrate and recycle and reloop different impurities and activities, what is that going to turn into for us? That's really what we need to look at. Touching base back onto that quality perception, you can kind of see is used to be able to smell it a little bit. If you've ever had that aroma of a good whiff of CO2 in your nose, you get that little kind of burning, tingling sensation and all that. That's how I used to know it was good, and now we're to the point where we're testing everything on a regular basis. So a lot of process improvement, and a lot of it has also been a little bit reactive, right? We found things we need to identify, and we want to stay engaged and make sure we can detect it, but we've done it because there's been a problem.
Thanks to Josh Pringle there, and also Rome Brenneman of Archea Energy and the ISBT. Great to get that double act, wasn't it, on the detection side and then the sustainability challenges and the future for CO2 in the food and beverage industry.
It absolutely was, yeah. Love welcoming Rome to the stage. He's always got quite a calm, measured performance about him, which was a bit of a play on words there, because I guess it is quite a measured topic.
So that wrapped up day one. Plenty of talking points to come out of that alone, but we still had a full day of content to go, didn't we? Starting session 4, talking about the energy transition. I think this was always going to be a theme that came up in a CO2 conference in 2025, wasn't it?
It was. I think I reflected in my stage notes on that morning, actually. It might have been across the 2 days. It's interesting with these topics because you can see some apathy creep in where the word sustainability or greening is used. Some people just care about the supply. All they want to know about is merchant CO2 supply. Where am I going to get it from? Where's the problem? But you can't escape in any conversation around the CO2 business, the energy transition, decarbonisation, another word, and that kind of byproduct opportunity, that circular economy. So yeah, that was a good start to day 2 of the agenda, and we got into 2 or 3 different topics there, including DAC, point source carbon capture, and of course this whole sphere of fuel cells, data centers, how you power those, and of course taking the CO2 out of the equation and keeping it.
Yeah, we'd love to share this entire session, wouldn't we? But in the interest of time, let's just share a few snippets of that.
The grid's already struggling. We see headlines, pick your newspaper, and every single newspaper talks about how the grid cannot meet this new challenge that's coming, and we're already seeing outages and brownouts and the grid turning down new connection requests from anybody. Right? Some more numbers. We talked about today, 4,000 terawatt hours per year is the energy consumption in this country. The expectation, and we'll talk only about the next 5 years because that's what I think this audience cares about most. Over the next 5 years, the consensus has been that 1,000 terawatt hours of new generation per year, by the way, needs to come online. Just to put that in perspective, average US single-family home consumes 10,000 kilowatt hours per year of electricity. 1 terawatt hour is 1 million kilowatt hours. So 1,000 terawatt hours is equivalent to 100 million US single-family homes. So that's the amount of added generation, 100 million new family homes coming online, nearly a third of the population in terms of power consumption. So that's the magnitude of how much is getting added or needs to get added over the next 5 years. Where's that going to come from? What technologies are going to be able to meet that challenge? Where you have the regulars, you have coal, nuclear, big natural gas plants. You have the clean energy solutions that have been deployed at scale over the last 20 years, wind and solar. And you have some new stuff like geothermal, right? If you delay the retirement or you bring back online some nuclear plants that have been decommissioned, like the 3 Mile Island plant is now being brought back online. And you also do that to coal, and you delay the retirements of some of these coal plants that are on the verge of being retired. You can get about 100 terawatt hours, so about 10%. If all the wind and solar that's been announced, projects that have been announced, get built, despite all the policy headwinds that industry is facing, if everything gets built, that's another 350 terawatt hours, so about a third. You still are left with nearly half of shortages. And the general consensus is that needs to get filled with natural gas, because this country has more than enough gas to meet, in fact, all the 1,000 terawatt hours of electricity needed. There are pockets of shortages based on pipeline constraints, but in general, the amount of gas that is available already is more than enough for that. So the general consensus is gas is likely going to play the biggest lion's share of the role to meet this challenge over the next 5 years. But you have a secondary challenge, though, which is the model. The centralized model of building massive power plants and then transporting that power over high voltage lines to where it's consumed takes a lot of time. The average time to build overhead high voltage lines, planning, permitting, and construction, is about 10 years. And even the low voltage lines take about 1 to 3 years to get that power. So the centralized model is not going to be the answer. You're not going to have data centers waiting 10 years to get their power, even if those generation sources are made available. So the solutions that have been getting a lot more traction over the last year, and we see getting even more traction over the next 5 years, are on-site power solutions, where you put the power plants close to the point of consumption, or in fact, co-located. That's what a lot of these bigger data center projects are doing. So natural gas-based power generation has the greatest chance of providing power in the near term in a reliable and consistent fashion, and they're more than likely to be located on-site or very close to where this new source of demand is coming. When you use natural gas-based power generation, there's an automatic opportunity here for carbon capture, because natural gas is methane, there's carbon in it, and the exhaust stream that comes out of these power plants has CO2. To put some numbers out there, if you take 100 gigawatts, which is only a portion of the 100 terawatt hour challenge we're talking about, gigawatts is capacity, terawatt hours is annual consumption. 100 gigawatts of 24/7 natural gas-based power generation is equal to 300 million metric tons per year of CO2 that could be captured if every single 100 of those 100 gigawatts had carbon capture. So it's substantial. Where would that CO2 go, or where could it go? Well, we have sequestration as an option. There's about 160 Class 6 well permits in the EPA tracker. If every single one of them got permitted and built over the next 5 years, and granted that's likely not going to be the case, there's going to be some puts and takes, some projects fall out, some new ones come in, but let's just say that's the number of wells that get built over the next 5 years. That's capacity for about 220 million metric tons per year of CO2 that could be sequestered. We have attractive tax credits, as a lot of speakers spoke about. The 45Q tax credit at $85 a ton for both utilization and sequestration. It's a key incentive to drive carbon capture. Not all projects are going to be located next to Class 6 wells or infrastructure to take the CO2. There's challenges with pipeline builds out, et cetera. So there will be, in our view, projects that can supply CO2 for the utilization market. A substantial amount if needed, depending on the regions, et cetera. And depending on pricing, we'll talk about high-level economics if it makes sense, but at $45 a ton, that's a very attractive incentive to make carbon capture projects pencil, because it provides a substantial credit to offset some or sometimes even all of the cost of capturing and transporting that CO2 to wherever it needs to go, either to a utilization market or underground, which means that the quote-unquote premium for zero carbon power to the end customer is negligible or very small, depending on which power generation technology you use.
Great to hear from Ivor Castelino there, wasn't it? Bloom Energy, they really are doing it. I spoke to Ivor just off stage, actually, after the session wrapped. And he was saying the journey they've been on, it has taken years, because you have to prove the concept, you have to get the fundamentals in place, you have to choose some of the right case studies to get the economics to work. And then once you've done that and you've proven it, you just fly forward with with the business case, and look at what Bloom are doing now. I mean, it's phenomenal.
And great to hear all of that background on how the grids are currently struggling and the solutions to that too from Ivor. So thank you to our panel there. And then this wasn't the final session of the event, but it's the final session that we're going to bring our listeners today, isn't it? And this was a session dedicated to dry ice.
It was, yeah. Really important, again, to bring this up. I think I've mentioned this a few times this year. Dry ice probably hasn't had as much of the attention as it should have in the last couple of years when we're talking about CO2, because we've been bogged down in policy and all of the different implications of that, and all of this CO2 sourcing and what we do going forward. But actually, dry ice, it's a hot market right now, and we needed to get into that, why it's a hot market, where the growth is coming from. And yeah, we had a great couple of talks around that.
And setting the scene on that session, we invited Maura Garvey back to the stage to really focus in on the supply and demand side of the dry ice market.
Demand drives supply of dry ice, and over the past 5 years, I've seen dry ice has grown about 5% annually, and it's reached about 4,600 tons per day, or about 9.2 million pounds per day. Quite a lot of ice. The main driver of this growth, I found, has been in the dry ice blast cleaning and use in the medical and transport markets. We can assume that dry ice supply equals demand. And although I know that there are losses in transport and usage because dry ice sublimates over time. But my analysis kind of said, okay, how much we supply ends up being what the demand number is. About 10 years ago, though, just looking back, dry ice demand was closer to 3,500 tons a day. So you can see it's really grown. In terms of the current dry ice production share by company, I've got this for you up here. It's Continental Carbonic Matheson, which actually is now rebranded into Nippon Sanso. That's 29%. They have the largest share, but Airgas is not too far behind with 25%. And then Linde with 15%, Reliant, the independent producer, with 8%. And then we have a whopping 23% that goes to the other category, and that is the industrial gas distributors and dry ice only producing companies. 10 years ago, that share of other was actually under 10%, and the major industrial gas companies really did dominate the dry ice business. But over the past sort of like 5 to 8 years, many industrial gas distributors have seen that profitability in the dry ice, and they've purchased pelletizers, and they've really grown in this space. And these industrial gas distributors basically didn't want to, redistribute for the majors. What they wanted to do was control their own supply, control their own destiny, which you've heard today, as well as to obtain, the higher margins, by producing it and then distributing it themselves. There are several industrial gas distributors and one dry ice only company that have gone really big into dry ice, which has kind of driven some of this growth, along with a lot of the numerous small ones. But they produce much larger volumes, similar to what the industrial gas companies do, in a single location. And this is primarily because dry ice blasting has grown by 5 to 10% over the last 5 years. One of those companies is Emery Dry Ice. They started off as a dry ice blasting company, but now they control their own supply and they also sell into the market. So they just simply focus on dry ice, but now they can control, their supply. The other really large independent dry ice producer is a distributor, and it's Sutton Garden up in the Indiana area. Over the same period of time, unfortunately, we heard about this yesterday, CO2 used to make dry ice has only grown by about 0.3% over the last decade. And this is because even though we've added on so many plants, we've also, a lot have closed down. So basically, we're not growing fast enough, and it's hard for demand to grow in that environment. So this is an issue, actually, for not only the CO2 market, but also for the dry ice industry going forward. Can it keep up with these growth rates if there's not enough supply? Next year is going to be a difficult year with not enough supply, liquid supply coming on to offset the losses. So, we'll see where that goes. This projection to increase dry ice share of this projection increases the dry ice share from 20% of the liquid CO2 consumption to be 23% by 2030. And that goes from 4,600 tons a day to about 5,900 tons per day. Currently, dry ice production consumes, if you want to put it in terms of the liquid, it's about 2.1 million tons per year of liquid CO2, and by 2030, that'll be 2.7 million tons per year of liquid CO2. Okay. So just sort of to conclude, because this is just sort of a small segment for me to give you today, dry ice production, 4,600 tons per day, 9.2 million pounds per day, growing annually at about 5% per year. In 2030, we expect it to reach 5,900 tons per day, given sufficient new sources are developed. The CO2 capacity growth, unfortunately, as I mentioned yesterday, it's 0.3%. It's grown over the last 10 years. This is going to be an issue for the dry ice market and the CO2 market going forward if we don't bring on new supplies, which those are in the works. It's just how fast we can get enough supply on.
Thanks to Maura once again. And then we followed that up with a presentation from Stephanie Vaughan of CMC Dry Ice. Really
a debut.
A debut on stage, and really getting into her experience at CMC Dry Ice and how they deal with delivering it against the demand.
Yeah, and I think, to use your phrase from earlier, with Stephanie, we got the boots on the ground view with dry ice, which was the perfect dovetail from Maura's talk, particularly how Stephanie was able to tell us about some of the novel, some might say quite unusual applications that are emerging for dry ice as well, which we heard about on a webinar a couple of months ago. We heard about again in that session, and I think Stephanie added a lot of value in the room.
I think so. So let's listen back to some of that.
So the pandemic obviously put dry ice on the news front page for everybody to see, something that none of us really in this room expected. Overnight, something that was once a behind-the-scenes type of product became really a household name because of how critical it was in vaccine distribution. And really at CMC too, this was a big defining moment for us. We had to expand our capacity quickly, adapt our logistics network, as well as work around the CO2 supply shortages and disruptions that were happening at the very same time as the demand was spiking. What we learned is that reliability isn't only about how much dry ice you can make or produce, it's about how fast you can respond, how flexible your supply chain really is, and how transparent you are with your customers during uncertain times. This is where partnerships with independents become very crucial. We want to be able to help out each other in times of needs. We all have the same common goal. We want to provide a quality on-time product for our clients. During COVID and the shortages, supply resilience is now becoming customers' #1 priority. Typically, when I would get calls, the conversation would go, hey, I need this amount of poundage by this date. What is the price? Or, hey, I actually needed it yesterday, but now the conversation is shifting to what makes you different? Do you have multiple liquid CO2 feedstocks? Or, hey, can you just supply me constantly every week on the certain day that I need it there by? So one of those biggest takeaways for me personally is that reliability is built before the crisis and not during it. The trust that we had to build with our partners during and after COVID made it possible for them to rely on us when their business was at stake and vice versa. That lesson is just as relevant today as it was then, whether it's pharmaceuticals, food, or industrial customers.
Our role isn't just to deliver ice, it's to deliver confidence that no matter what's going on in the market, that they can keep their operations running smoothly. Which brings us to when reliability breaks down. So when we talk about reliability, it's easy to only think about whether the product arrives on time or not. But the true impact of unreliability goes far deeper, and it shows in ways customers feel immediately. So for example, when a dry ice delivery is delayed for a biotech client, it's not just a late truck. It could mean thousands of dollars of spoiled samples, delayed research trials, or even canceled clinical trials. In the food industry, missed deliveries means products don't make it to the shelves on time, and that's a loss of sales, that can be wasted products, and also reputational damage with their own customers. Even in industrial cleaning and manufacturing, talking about the dry ice blasting, if a plant can get that dry ice that they need, downtimes costs add up very, very quickly. Sometimes an hour of downtime can be more expensive than the entire month's worth of dry ice that they're purchasing. So we really have to think of it as they are literally using it in their everyday operations, and it needs to be there when it's supposed to be there. And also, when most people talk about in our industry about reliability, the focus is more on, plant uptime or securing enough CO2. And yes, of course, that's critical in processes, but from the customer's perspective, reliability is much broader. First, there's logistics reliability. It's not just about making the product, producing it, it's about getting it where it needs to be on time every time. That means, having reliable trucking, tote tracking, and smart routing. Just doing, everyday maintenance on vehicles, whether that's oil changes, tires. I know that sounds so simple, but those are things that, if those are up to par, then that's gonna help you be more reliable for your client.
And thanks to Stephanie Vaughan there of CMC Dry Ice. Following that, Rob, we had our panel discussion, newcomers and new opportunities. I think we should get into that in the next episode of this podcast, don't you? Because there was so many takeaways from that, and such a great panel too.
Yeah, too much to try and fit into this episode. It needs an episode on its own, I think.
Yeah, we're already running quite long today with all of those clips, but really wanted to make sure our listeners got the most of it. Yeah, exactly. And I think this episode we've given the flavour of where CO2's at, certainly in the US, a little bit globally. The trends aren't too different as you go across the regions. So yeah, we've given a good flavour, I think. Yeah, absolutely. And well, we're counting down, I guess, 12 months and we'll be back in the US discussing CO2 again. So who knows what the market and what the industry will be looking like then. Yeah, exactly. And hopefully we won't have quite such a gap to the next episode because we've got all that audio now. Yes, we can go straight back and listen to that panel discussion and pick out some of our talking points from then, all the while getting ready for our Helium Super Summit in just a few days' time. Can't wait. But do be sure to like, follow and share the 1895 podcast, and we'll be back again next time.
This message is proudly sponsored by CO2 Meter.